let's start with Western affairs and Cuba and Venezuela policy. What do you see from the Biden administration? What where are your concerns? What are the issues that you have going forward?
Well, I haven't seen much. I think they're still talking about what they want to do internally. We've partnered up with Bob Menendez, as we have for years, a Democrat who's now the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And we're pretty much in agreement on what we hope will be, to the extent there are changes, it should be fine tuning. Here's what's happened inside of Cuba, Jim. What's happened is that the government there had a plan, and the plan was we're going to use this opening under Obama to make the state-owned entities, particularly the military-owned companies that control them that's profitable in Cuba, they're going to make a bunch of money, but they were going to still control. They were going to be the funnel that controlled how much of it got to the people. They had no interest whatsoever in Cubans having any sort of economic independence or any sort of economic self-sufficiency, and I think that's become obvious to the Cuban people. And what the Trump administration changes, for all the noise that was made about it and all the criticism of it, what it basically said is, you just can't do business with these military-owned entities. And if you're going to send money to your relatives in Cuba, the government can't take a 25% cut off the top. And but I hope we can get to a point where the individual Cuban that decides to open up a small business can do so. But I don't think the government there is going to allow it. And I think that, combined with the expansion of internet access, although still heavily restricted compared to ours, in Cuba, has allowed people to communicate with each other and has allowed people to become exposed to different ideas and thoughts around the world. And I think you're seeing it manifest. So I think it would be a terrible mistake to now throw that regime a lifeline at a moment where they're facing those pressures in the midst of a generational transition in their leadership.
I want to get to immigration in a little bit, but just to pick up on staying in the hemisphere for a second, I know that there was some level of status given to Venezuelans who were in the country as President Trump left office. Do you support creating through Congress a TPS for Venezuelans, and do you see that as likely as happening?
I would. I have co-sponsored in the past, intend to do so again. I hope it becomes unnecessary because freedom and democracy return to Venezuela. But in the interim, I've said, we worked hard to get the Trump administration to do sort of deferred or delayed deportation efforts like what existed and still exists for some other countries. I think Liberia is one of them. So right now, no one can or will be deported. And that sort of creates, at this moment anyways, there not being a need. But the biggest problem with TPS has been that none of them are truly temporary, that once they're put in place, they sort of never go away. So we have the ones we have now. We're going to have to continue. I support continuing to extend the ones for Haiti and Honduras and places like that. But it's harder to add new ones because the old ones never go away. And that's what's created. If it's going to be temporary, there has to be some endpoint to it. But I do support in Venezuela primarily for this reason, and that is we can't deport people back to a country that we don't even recognize the people who are in charge of it or govern it as a legitimate government.
Have you had any conversation with President Biden since the election or since he was sworn in?
I haven't. I'm not one of the folks they've reached out to yet, but that don't come. But I've talked to people in his administration, the new National Security Advisor, the new Secretary of State, their nominee for CIA, the new Director of National Intelligence that we moved quickly to confirm on the president's first day in office. And I'm sure that time will come, but we've talked to people in the administration. I've not spoken to President Biden.
All right. Just while we're talking about nominees, Merrick Garland for Attorney General, do you envision supporting his nomination to become Attorney General?
Well, I don't know yet. I haven't had a chance to go through his hearing yesterday and the answers he gave to a series of questions. Generally, my position is I give the president tremendous deference in terms of appointing people to the cabinet. There are people I think cross the line, and that certainly, Becerra is someone I'm not going to support. He has no experience in healthcare. He has a long history of being a culture warrior, suing nuns and doing all sorts of other things, going after independent journalists, the Veritas Project people, just because he didn't like them. Actually, even the LA Times criticized them for overreach on some of these things. So, but Garland, I'm familiar with him from his time when he was first nominated. I haven't gone through yet the hearing, so I haven't had a chance to look at all his answers, but I'll have to make that decision. I'm not on that committee. They haven't even voted him out yet.
I asked you if you've had a chance to speak to President Biden. I also wanted to ask, have you had a chance at all, or when was the last time you spoke to former President Trump?
Well, I can't give you an exact date. It was probably some point in November, but I don't remember the exact date. I haven't spoken to him since all these things have happened, but I usually don't call him, or we don't, unless I have something to bring up or talk about at that moment or what have you. And obviously a lot's gone on since the end of the election till now in the transition, but I'm sure I will at some point here fairly soon. But I've talked to, his son, I've talked to his Ivanka and Jared a couple times, and others, and former members that worked in the administration a little bit. But everyone's kind of going on with their lives and resettling as they're getting out of government, and we're sort of going through our own transitions over here. So we just haven't had a chance to talk, but I'm sure that'll happen.
Do you envision making
Florida?
There's obviously. Do you envision making a pilgrimage up to Mar-a-Lago as some of your counterparts in the Republican Party have done recently?
Well, it wouldn't be a pilgrimage for me. I mean, it's in Florida, it's the state, Mar-a-Lago. So it would be a visit to someone who lives in our state, as I do people all the time. So I don't consider it a pilgrimage. I'm actually, I don't believe I've ever been to Mar-a-Lago at any point, but that may very well come a day where I'll visit there. But for me, it's not a pilgrimage. Other people have to come from other states. For me, it's just a short ride up I-95.
I do wanna though spend a little bit of time talking about, because this is the first chance you and I have had a chance to speak about the events of January 6th, the impeachment trial that followed. I want to set aside for a moment the issue that you raised, and you based your vote. I've read all the documents that you've put out, the statements you put out. I've listened to you speak about this in other forums. You said that you based your vote largely on the fact that you did not like the precedent of convicting a president for impeachment, once they've left office. So setting that aside for a second, granting that as being the justification for your vote, did the managers, though, from the House convince you that Donald Trump bore some responsibility for what happened on January 6th?
Well, they didn't have to convince me of that, because I said from the outset that I thought he bore some responsibility, but the primary responsibility in my mind continues to belong, as it does anywhere, on the people that did it. I mean, look, there's an assortment. People will all learn more. Certainly the public will learn more about the events of that day, but there was a wide assortment of individuals involved in that. Let's begin with this. There were I don't know what the latest estimate is, 300,000 to 400,000 people that came up to Washington for that day. Of that, a small fraction, though a significant number, but a small fraction, I would say probably less than 1 or 2%, actually entered the Capitol and did that. There were people associated with that have been involved in these things even before Donald Trump was elected president. Some of these militia groups, these anti-government groups I warned about last June and July, when they were showing up at the unrest that was going on in different streets around the country, in some cases, because they're anti-government militias and activists. There are other people that sadly have been ensnarled in conspiracy theories online and thought they were sort of acting out this great day that was going to be the storm, as they call it, and so forth. So there's an assortment of individuals there. Now, clearly, when you're aware that people like that are gathering, I think you have to understand that things could get out of hand. Certainly law enforcement was aware of it, but ultimately the individuals who did this are the ones responsible for it, and they're being held accountable for it. They're being arrested, they're being investigated. But I think it's really important. I'm not in any way, I said it almost as it was happening, that what was going on was unpatriotic, un-American, should not be happening, and criminal. But by the same token, we need to recognize that there were tens and hundreds of thousands of people here, the overwhelming majority of whom left that rally and went back to the airport, or got in their cars and drove home, or went to the hotel. Some of them weren't even aware it was going on until later on. And that's important. I don't think it's fair to paint everyone with the same brush here.
No, but I want to go back to the level, the extent to which you think Donald Trump bears some responsibility. Mitch McConnell, in his statement, said former President Trump's actions preceding the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There is no question that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. Do you agree with Mitch McConnell?
I think that goes beyond what I would say and what I have said. I really do. Look, this is a hot political moment. People are passionate, but I think that's true across the board. And I think we are in very dangerous territory if we start saying that every time someone is out there and uses heated political rhetoric, you are now responsible for what every individual in that crowd goes off and does as a result of it. I think that's true for both sides, okay? Because you can stand up and give a speech on an issue, and then someone goes out there and takes a shot at someone motivated from the speech because they believe that the other side is evil and the other side needs to be destroyed. So I think we have to be very careful about saying those sort of things. And I think it ends up sort of excusing the people that were involved in this, overlooking the reality behind why some of them were there and why some of them did what they did. I don't think the president's blame is 0%, but I wouldn't put a percentage on it, and I wouldn't go as far as Mitch McConnell went in what he said.
Well, how far would you go? I mean, to what extent does Donald Trump bear responsibility?
Well, simply to the extent that you know that there are people in this crowd that are in town to do things because you're the president and you have access to the sort of information. And should you govern yourself in that way, to hopefully not say anything that could be taken the wrong way. On the other hand, I think the overwhelming majority of people would hear the speech he gave, would say it's not much different speeches he's given multiple other occasions over the last 5 years, and there wasn't a riot that emerged after the fact. I think the only difference between that day and other days is that on that particular day, there was information that there were some really bad people in town intent on doing far more than just protesting, and perhaps weigh your actions as a result of it. But
it's interesting, Senator, because you were incredibly prescient in your comments in 2016. I mean, you go back and look, and I've gone back and read almost everything that you said at the time, and it's quite amazing how you predicted all of this. You predicted everything we saw. In 2013, and March 13, 2016, you said, here's what the people need to understand. This notion that a president can just say anything they want, could say anything they want, whatever comes to mind, it's just not true, and it's reckless and it's dangerous. And specifically discussing violence, which you noted were occurring at Trump rallies, Trump events, not at your events, not at other people's events. You even said not even at Bernie Sanders' events. You said, this is what happens when a leading presidential candidate goes around feeding into a narrative of anger and bitterness and frustration. I think the question is what this means for the future of America, not just the Republican Party. And I just want to add one more thing that you said, because you spoke on this often. You said, but mark my words, there will be prominent people in American politics who will spend years explaining to people how they fell into this. And I guess listening to some of the things that you've said in recent years, I'm wondering if you fell into it yourself.
Well, Jim, I would say this to you. Number one is if you look over the last 4 years, the president has spoken on almost a daily basis, and there weren't daily riots. In fact, there's one instance that we now have of this sort of unrest, and it was just a day and time that obviously had a lot of factors in one place at one time. I continue to believe that a president's words have impact, and I've already said to you, but I think he bears some level of responsibility for what happened that day and the things leading up to that day. But by the same token, I'm not going to ignore that there are elements involved in our society that go beyond simply Donald Trump. This idea that somehow all of this is Donald Trump's fault does not excuse him, but is also fair. Because the truth of the matter is that we have fundamental things going on within our society that made Donald Trump possible, that made the things I was talking about on that date possible. Donald Trump did not create these factors. He's a product of a lot of the things that were already in our country and these deep divisions that frankly both sides have when you have Democratic members going out there telling people, and I've got the nasty, disgusting letters that are sent to my home, to my children to prove it, and I've got the protesters that have confronted us in our home to prove it. I just don't run to the news every day to talk about it, but it happens, that there is nastiness all across the political spectrum, and there are members of Congress on the Democratic side that have told people to get in a member of Congress's face, to confront him in public. Chuck Schumer said that if the Supreme Court didn't rule the way he wanted them to, they would pay the consequences for it. They don't stand for election. What do they mean by consequences? So I think it's true across the board. And frankly, and I'm not saying you, but I'm saying if you look at cable news is entirely driven by conflict. Every morning you turn on a cable news network, they're not reporting news. They're trying to get people angry at each other and to hate each other because it drives up the ratings. So all of this we need to examine as a society and as a country. I think it's unfair to pin all of that on one person.
But he is the president, and the president bears a certain level higher accountability than others. And again, this is the last thing I'll quote from 2016, because it rang when you just said something. I was going to leave it out, but I'll say it. Most countries around the world that are failures because they deposit their hopes in a person, a strong leader who comes forward to say, put me in power and I will make the country better. That's exactly what Donald Trump, is doing. The rhetoric reminds me of third world strongmen. That's what you said in 2016. Didn't we see a third world strongman in the days from the election leading up through January 6th? No, because in a third world strongman doesn't have to leave their position of power. The President of the United States, at the end of the day, Donald Trump, walked out of the White House and went into private life. In the third world banana republic,
that transition doesn't happen. There was an election in this country. He didn't like the outcome. He complained about the outcome. He raised some claims that were not proven to be true, and he raised others that I think people will look at and say, okay, that's not fraud, but we do have problems with voting laws in certain places that undermine public confidence and create the opportunity for these sort of things to be said. That's why Florida and other states are trying to tighten that thing up. That doesn't mean the outcome is illegitimate. It means that confidence in an election, that's why these laws are in place, so people can't raise these things in the future. But I think it's unfair to say that he was a third world. I see people throw these terms out there loosely. Third world strongmen ultimately don't leave power because there isn't some transition.
Well, you said it. Those are your words. The rhetoric reminds me of a third world strongman.
Sure, but and at the time we were running in a primary, I was pointing out to the fact that rhetoric was not my rhetoric and that it has consequences for it. Again, it goes to what I said to you at the beginning. Donald Trump and I do not have the same style and the same way of acting. But I will say also this to you. I also believe that despite the things he does that I haven't agreed with and have said so, and in fact, on times voted against some of the things he wanted that we didn't agree on, I also believe that he's been often treated unfairly. Right now, we have children. We have reopening migrant centers, including one here in South Florida, the exact same thing Donald Trump did. And I will bet you right now that the media coverage of it will not even be 1/10 of what it was when Donald Trump did that. The exact same thing, just 2.5 years ago.
And I promise you. No, I'm sorry.
Sure
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I'm sure you will, Jim. But what I'm trying to tell you is that at the end of the day, there's an imbalance here and a hypocrisy here that the American people see, and it actually strengthens the arguments that he makes.
But and I promise I do want to talk to you about the PPP program, about immigration. So I promise this is the last thing. You talk about how, and I agree with you. I've covered you, Senator, from the time of your days in the State House 20 years ago. And I know your rhetoric isn't like that. And there was a moment in 2016 where you even said Donald Trump got the better of you when you lowered yourself to his level, talking about the little hands comment. And you apologized for that, and you were sincere in saying that that's not who you are. But then I saw on November 1st at the Opelika event where you said regarding that bus that was surrounded by Trump supporters on the highway in Texas. When you spoke at the rally, you said, "I saw yesterday a video of these people in Texas. Did you see it? And the crowd is cheering while you're saying this. All the cars on the road, we love what they did."
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that, I mean, in a way, didn't you fall prey to the type of the very thing that you're saying we have to avoid now on both sides? Didn't you fall into that?
No, because what I saw at the time was a video of a bunch of cars on the road and a Biden bus on the road. Now, after the fact is when you saw reports about, oh, they tried to run them off the road. I still haven't seen a video of them running off the road, but that's what some people say happened. If I had seen a video of that, I would have said something very different. I was talking about a caravan of cars on a highway while there was a Biden bus driving. I didn't see anybody cutting anybody off or running them off the road or doing anything dangerous. If I had seen that, I would have said something different. That's what people say happened, and it may have. I still to this day haven't seen it. Maybe there is no video of that. Maybe there is. But that's what I was talking about.
Okay, I do want to move on, and I just thought this is the first chance you and I have had to talk about those issues, and so I just wanted to give it go through it.
Sure. Ask me anything you want.
Yeah, and I've always appreciated the fact that you've been open that way, and that you continue to have these conversations with me, even when you know I'll ask these types of questions, and I look forward to having another conversation down the line.
Of course.
Let's talk about immigration reform for a second. But before we do that, let's talk about the Homestead Detention Center that the Miami Herald is reporting today. We're filming this Tuesday evening. The Miami Herald is reporting today that the Biden administration plans on reopening the detention center in Homestead for unaccompanied minors. I think it's 13 to 17-year-olds. This follows another report of another migrant detention camp being opened in Texas. I saw the tweet that you sent out, and we can talk about that in a second. But first, let me just ask you from a policy standpoint, do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea to open up that detention center?
I think we have no choice. Now, in this particular case, they're arguing they need to do it because of the COVID, and so they don't have time to process people. But the bottom line is this: we have seen a surge in minors coming to the border over the last month. And the reason why there's a surge is because the message has gotten out that there's this new presidency, there's the new administration, And if you show up at the border with children, they're going to process you. They're going to admit you into the country, and they're going to say you need to show up for an asylum hearing that most don't even show up for. And that gets out. Now, trust me when I tell you, I feel tremendous compassion for these people. I understand what they are fleeing. I do. I also understand that the people that are bringing them here are horrible, evil human beings, these traffickers. They take advantage of them. They rape the women. Some of those people don't even make the journey. They charge them thousands of dollars. And by the way, these people lie. They go back and they say, there's a new law in America. You can now get in, just bring a child. And we know this. And so when you allow a group to show up at the border and allow them in because they have children, you are basically creating an incentive to bring children on that dangerous journey. Now, what do you do with them when you're at the border? How do we know that that's really their parents and not some child that was brought along? How do you know all? You have to confirm all these things. We don't have a way to hold family units together. We can't rent some big hotel and put everybody in the same rooms. And you can't have a place where you have kids running around and adults running around and terrible things could happen. So you have to protect those children by putting them in a place. That's what the Trump administration tried to do, and they were roundly criticized for it. That's what the reality that the Biden administration is now facing. And my point is, when Trump did it, it was a humanitarian crisis. It was a human rights violation. But now that Biden's doing it, it will get very little attention. Certainly won't get the wall-to-wall coverage and the people camped out there every day with the news sticks. That's just true. It is absolutely true.
Well, we don't know that yet. Let's see what happens when that opens. I've already talked to some immigration rights advocates who are very upset at the prospect that the Biden administration may reopen that camp, and I would expect that we'll see protests. I would also note, though, that I think one of the things that angered so many people was the idea that the Trump administration lost track of children, lost track of who their parents were, and ended up separating children, not just in a family separation way, but in a way that the Biden administration is now forced to try to figure out how to reunite some of these kids with family members who they don't even know who they are at this point.
Well, but that's not a function. That's a function of two things. First of all, that's a function of parents or people claiming to be their parents. In most cases, they are their parents coming into the country, and then you can't find them. Because when an immigration authority is calling to partner you up with your children, those people aren't answering the phone. In some cases, it's the fact that a minor arrives at the border and they're going to have to stay with an aunt and uncle, and those people have to be vetted. You have to vet who these people are. You can't just put them in the home of someone and suddenly terrible happens and you're held responsible for it. Here's the bottom line. All of these things you're saying are the reason why this should not be incentivized. No country in the world, not even the richest, most powerful country in the world, can create a system in which thousands of people can show up at your border with children, and you have some orderly process by which they're allowed admission into the country without any prior approval. You just can't do it, and no other country tries. And we shouldn't either. It's inhumane.
Let's talk broadly about immigration reform. Is there any aspect of the plans that are starting to take root? Is there anything there that you would support? A pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented folks in this country? Would you support something for them?
Well, I think here's the first thing I would say is Americans are having trouble before they can even return to the country. You're an American, you fly overseas. Before you can even come back, you have to take a COVID test. You have to go through hoops and hurdles to go out and to come back in. So right now, we're not even saying that we're not even allowing people to come in legally. How could you then have a process to encourage people to come in illegally?
Well, no, it's not encouraging. It's not encouraging them.
Absolutely.
In the sense that the way the rule is January 1st. If you're not here as of January 1st, you can apply for.
Well, that's okay. Now, but now you're talking about so you're asking about the legislation.
Yes. So
here's the bottom line. Number one is our number one focus now should be on getting through this pandemic and rebuilding our economy. That should be our number one priority. This is not. I don't think immigration reform at this moment is as important as it was in 2013 or at times in the past. Number two, and I've said this now over and over again since that experience in 2013, the only way that you have a chance to move forward on immigration reform is first and foremost, you have to prove to the American people that illegal immigration, unlawful immigration is under control. You cannot say that right now when we have a surge of illegal immigration on our borders, including children arriving. Number three, the number one priority of our immigration system is we have to have laws and they have to be enforced. And they are among the most generous laws on the planet. 1 million people a year are admitted into the United States legally every single year. We're proud of that, but that's the process. And if you're not going to enforce that process, then you're not going to have a process. Mexico has immigration laws. Canada has immigration laws. Every country in the world has them. We need them as well. At some point, we have to modernize our legal immigration system. It is my view that a 21st century immigration system needs to be based more on what you're going to do when you come here for work than it simply is on how many family members you have living here. And then at some point after you've done those two things, you will have to deal with the fact that you've got 10, 11, 12, I don't know what the number is now, millions of people in the country that have been here a long time, who are not dangerous criminals. And frankly, at this point, are not going to go back and may even own businesses. And you're going to have to find a way to incorporate them into American life. But if you don't do the other two things first, that 12 million will turn into 25 or 30 million, and we'll never get this problem solved.
But how many of those people have become the essential workers that we need so often? I mean, I think about, you say the pandemic is a reason not to move forward with immigration reform right now and to help those folks. I could make the argument that the pandemic is the reason why, because we've placed so much on them. They're working in fields and in packing plants and in places that have kept food on our tables at risk to their own lives. And should they not be able to try to come forward?
Yeah, but that's a different topic. If they're working in fields, then that calls for fixing our agriculture program, which I've put forward ideas on how to do it. Because a lot of those people would like to come here seasonally, work, go back home, come back again. The reason why they don't leave is because they're going to have trouble getting back in next year. If you have seasonal labor needs or defined shortages in certain fields, then you modernize the system to make it possible for people to come here legally, go back legally, and come back again legally.
So is that something you could do soon, as opposed to waiting?
But that's not what they want. I understood, but that's not what they're proposing. They're proposing to do it all at once. And I'm telling you, if you do those things before you put in place the enforcement, and right now we don't have enforcement. They've suspended the wall. They told ICE to release people, to not prioritize for deportation certain people. When you do that, you're actually encouraging the people to come here illegally.
What about the dreamers? How about the dreamers? Can we finally take care of the dreamers in a separate standalone bill?
Sure. And
you would support that?
But yeah, and that offer was made 3 years ago, I believe. In fact, President Trump made a very generous offer 3 years ago. He made a very generous offer, and it was turned down because they didn't just want the dreamers, they also wanted their parents. And they also wanted them to then use their new status to be able to claim relatives to come in from abroad. They're the ones that are not willing to compromise on this, because the activist immigrant, not the immigrants, most immigrants simply want to be legalized or want a process to be legalized. But the activist elements and the left and the Democratic Party, they want it all. They want the whole thing. And that's where the problem becomes. If they were willing to do it in pieces, you could get a lot done.
Your staff is texting me, telling me I've got to try to move you along. I'm going to try to filibuster as long as I can. But let me just try to ask you a few more questions, and then I'll let you go. I wanted to ask about, from a politics standpoint, you're running for re-election. Do you rule out the possibility, or do you believe that you leave open the possibility of running for president in 2024?
Well, the way I tell people about that is I already ran once. So clearly at some point I was interested in being president. So it'd be silly for me to say no, never, ever. But frankly, one of the things I've learned, and you've known me a long time, I'm Speaker of the House, state legislator doing this, is, I think one of the things I've learned in time is you kind of focus on what's before you and not always, thinking about what's down the road in a couple of years. I have a job, I have things I want to accomplish here. So I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on re-election. And honestly, I'm not trying to be evasive. I just don't know what the country is going to be like, what the party is going to want, what the country is going to need, or even what my own life is going to be like in 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, I weigh all these things all the time. I have I'm gone 3.5, 4 days a week. I have a young family that continues to grow up every single day. Every day I'm not there is a day I can't get back. That's a consideration for me in many of the decisions that I make. So I'm not in a position to tell you where I'm going to be 3 years from now, the way maybe I once or used to be. But I'm certainly running for re-election. We'll see what the future holds after that. I'll cross that bridge when I get near that bridge.
Your staff is yelling at me. So let me ask you this. Can you tell me your phone conversation that you had with Ivanka Trump? What was that like? Because there had been speculation that she might try to challenge you in a primary. How did that call come about, and what did you talk about?
First of all, I talk to them all the time because I've gotten to know them going back to 2015 and 2016 when our families always sat next to each other at the debates. I worked with her on a bunch of public policy issues. There's been no speculation. It was a rumor reported by CNN. Somebody went on the record. I forgot, some former Florida reporter went on the record and speculated. They're the ones that speculated. There's never been any feelers. There's never been any of that. This was all the entire time. It was just people chattering. Now, I'm not, and that's it goes from a rumor reported by who's basically a gossip columnist or CNN into the sort of mainstream reporting on something that was never going to happen. I simply ignored it. I've known Ivanka now for 5 or 6 years. I've worked with her and Jared on a bunch of initiatives. I've talked to them all the time. So it wasn't one phone call. I've talked to them several times before, leading up to and since they left their work at the White House. They're now residents of South Florida. So we've talked a lot about that. And this whole idea they were going to run was never under consideration, but people like to talk about stuff because it's good to talk about. I just let it play itself out.
Senator, I have to note that we passed a grim milestone with 500,000 deaths from COVID. The last question I'm going to ask you in this interview is this. Was that milestone, did we have to reach that milestone? Did we have to have 500,000 deaths? Could there not have been more done earlier by the Trump administration to prevent us from reaching this number?
Well, I think you can ask that question of virtually anywhere in the world, everyone who has struggled with it. Certainly every open society. We're not China. We can't lock people in homes, entire blocks, or lie about the true numbers. We'll never know how many people really died in China or Russia or Iran or anywhere else. So that's one of the challenges. I think the second challenge that we face in this country, and in some ways it's sort of a sign of our advancement, is we do have a lot of people that survive into their 80s and 90s, but we know these folks are more vulnerable to this disease if they get it. Our life expectancy in that way is higher than some other countries we're being compared to. And that's been a challenge. Now, I think everyone would say, okay, if we could go back to March of last year, are there things we could have done differently? Certainly. I think there were things that everyone could have done differently. States could have done differently. I bet you in New York, Cuomo was looking at what he could have done differently instead of sending a bunch of people to die in nursing homes because he didn't want them in the hospitals. But I also think we have to look at some of the achievements. The world today, in this country, we have not one, but 2 vaccines developed in a record amount of time that by the middle part of this summer will allow this country to get back to some level of normalcy, but not face a total economic societal collapse. I think in the midst of this, we also have to congratulate our first responders, our doctors, our nurses, who developed in real time therapeutic and treatment advances that have dramatically improved the chances of survival and improved the outcomes when people were hospitalized. And even now we are seeing a dramatic decline in the number of nursing home infections, which is going to result in less hospitalizations and less deaths. All of that achieved in something that and by the way, did all of that while we still don't know the origins of this virus, when it started, what patient zero was. If all of that information had been shared earlier, we could have had a vaccine even earlier than we did.
Senator, I'll end it here. Laura and Ainsley are going to rake me over the coals viciously, I have no doubt. But let me just say this. It's been 6 months. You've always been gracious with your time, and I've always appreciated you coming on. It was 6 months since the last time you came on, so I had a lot stored up. I'd love to talk to you, get you back sooner to talk about PPP, talk about what you're doing with China, because I think you've been a leader on that. The environmental issues that I know you've done with regard to the Everglades. You're running for re-election. You have a report card. I'd like to talk to you more about all of those issues. So please, if I haven't alienated Laura and Ainsley entirely, we can schedule something sooner than later.
No, absolutely. We'll make it work. I think we do a show at least 2 or 3 times a year. So we'll have a makeup one.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Bye.
Thanks.